The end of the Mycenaean period marked the collapse of high civilization on the Greek mainland. For roughly 350 to 400 years, Greece experienced what historians often call the Greek Dark Age, a period characterized by the disappearance of many features associated with complex society. Greece became relatively isolated from the rest of the Mediterranean, especially from the eastern regions with which it had once traded extensively. The clearly defined ruling class that had dominated Mycenaean society vanished. This was not primarily the result of rebellion or ideological change, but of economic collapse. There simply was not enough surplus wealth to sustain a permanent elite. Large Mycenaean palace states gave way to much smaller social units tied to limited parcels of land. The basic unit of society during this period was the oikos, meaning household. The oikos included the extended family, landless warriors who attached themselves to a household, free retainers who farmed or herded livestock, and a small number of slaves, usually captured in warfare. Each oikos functioned as its own political, legal, and religious community, with distinct loyalties and customs. Government at the level of the oikos was simple and personal. Households were responsible for defending their own land, livestock, and family members from outsiders. Men able to bear arms combined both to protect their property and, when opportunity arose, to raid neighboring households, stealing cattle, goods, and sometimes women. Decisions affecting the household were made by a council of elders, typically led by the family head, whose authority rested on age, experience, and military competence rather than formal office. Dark Age Greece can thus be described as a frontier society marked by self-reliance, local conflict, and limited resources. The plural of oikos is oikoi, and interactions between oikoi were frequently violent. Feuds were often private rather than political, since no central authority existed to regulate conflict. Within the oikos, however, there existed a strong assumption of male equality. Because wealth differences were minimal, all men capable of fighting were regarded as social equals. Religion during the Dark Age was complex and deeply domestic. Dark Age Greeks were animists and ancestor worshippers. Greek households believed they were surrounded by protective spirits that guarded the family, its land, its livestock, and its fertility. The dead were believed to possess a dangerous spiritual force, often described as mana, which could be either beneficial or harmful. It was therefore essential to care for the dead properly. This required the correct disposal of the body through burial or cremation, offerings of food and drink to sustain the dead, and periodic rituals to pacify ancestral spirits. Failure to observe these practices could result in pollution or miasma and bring disaster upon the family. This emphasis on ancestor worship tied families deeply to specific land. If a family was driven from its ancestral home, the spirits of the dead were left behind, resulting, it was believed, in profound misfortune. As a result, land was not merely economic property, it was sacred. Dark Age Greece was unmistakably a warrior society. The most respected households were those capable of defending their land and of acquiring new land, livestock, and wives. The practice, often termed wife-stealing, must be understood in context. In societies where neighboring households were also enemies, peaceful marriage negotiations were often impossible. Yet families needed women to reproduce, and incest was forbidden. In such conditions, raiding neighboring communities to capture brides became a functional, if violent, solution. This practice was not unusual in early societies marked by constant feuding. Over time, however, repeated raids created kinship ties across households. Former enemies became relatives. Feuding gradually declined as interconnected families recognized shared ancestry. As kinship networks expanded, multiple oikoi joined together to form larger units known as a genos. A genos was typically united by belief in a common ancestor, often a semi-divine hero who had lived in the distant past. The cult of the hero became the spiritual center of the community. Each household maintained a small shrine, while a central altar or sanctuary served the entire genos. Ritual festivals reinforced communal bonds. Political authority at this level was exercised by a chief, advised by a council of elders known as a bouli. This was a primitive form of government, but one in which we can already glimpse the roots of later Greek political institutions. Indeed, some Greek city-states would never progress far beyond this basic structure. By around the middle of the 8th century BCE, agricultural production began to improve. Population increased, trade revived, and communities grew more prosperous. Small villages expanded into towns, becoming centers of markets, craft production, and local government. Trade across the eastern Mediterranean stimulated further growth and encouraged the development of more organized political structures. One of the first regions to benefit from this recovery was Athens. Unlike many Mycenaean centers, Athens appears to have survived the collapse of the Bronze Age with less disruption. Archaeological evidence indicates that Athens weathered the Dark Age relatively well, maintaining economic activity and gradually prospering throughout the period. This would help explain why Athens emerged so prominently in the centuries that followed.